The Steubenville rape case continues to have more fallout. Yesterday, 2 teenage girls were arrested in Ohio and accused of using social media to threaten the victim in the rape case. The 2 girls, 16 and 15 respectively, are charged with aggravated menacing on Twitter and Facebook for threatening the life of the victim. The 2 tweets read, quote, "I'll stop tweeting about this when everyone STFU and understands Jane Doe is a whore." The other one read, "You ripped my family apart. You made my expletive cry. So when I see you," another expletive, "it's going to be a homicide." They're in juvenile court this afternoon, and joining us to discuss this is trial attorney Richard Roth. So, Richard, what are menacing charges and what kinds of penalties go with them? Richard, you are muted, my friend. Give a look there, I see.
I'm sorry, I'm back on. Sorry about that.
It's an occupational hazard here at HuffPost Live.
I forgot. So what they are essentially is charges which essentially threaten the life of someone else. It's essentially more than a menace, it's a threat. The homicide reference is, for example, a threat. I'm going to harm you is, for example, a threat. And the whole area has just exploded with the Twitter and Facebook and internet and LinkedIn. And it's become a very serious thing that prosecutors look at.
Yeah, this just gets back to, it's a much more aggravated sense of just bullying, cyberbullying, right? But this is something that goes well beyond that, I imagine, given the circumstances of this particular case.
That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what happened in New Jersey recently with a boy who literally jumped off the George Washington Bridge after his roommate essentially cyberbullied him and was convicted. So it's become a very, very big part of what the prosecutors look at. And the defense generally is that they weren't serious, they were kidding. But this is such a horrific case in light of what the media's gotten and the tweets that have been around and the YouTube videos that the world essentially knows, certainly the country knows what exactly went on here.
So do you know what type of penalties then these 2 girls will be facing should they be found guilty of aggravated menacing?
Well, presumably like the boys who were just convicted of rape, they will be tried as juveniles. So therefore, we're talking about juvenile detention and not any kind of an actual jail time. And it certainly will be less than the boys who were convicted with rape. It could be a year, it could be 60 days, it could be somewhere in between. It won't be an extended period of time, but it is a very, very difficult time for everyone, because it's the whole thing is so sad and so problematic, and hopefully it's an eye-opener to the country that, it's so easy to just tweet something that people think twice before they actually do it.
Now, where does the First Amendment come into this?
Well, that's an interesting question. The First Amendment comes in, you have the right to free speech. You have the right to say whatever you want, whenever you want. You don't have the right to threaten someone. So, for example, if I stand up in a movie theater and yell fire, or if I'm standing on let's say, the House steps of a Senate or of a town hall, and I say, let's kill the mayor, that's not acceptable. There is a line, and it's not easily drawn. The U.S. Supreme Court essentially said where there's imminent lawless action, a threat of a homicide, a threat of anything which is other than your right to object, puts it over the line and essentially disavows or reduces your First Amendment defense.
So will the court have to determine whether or not these threats that were made over the internet by these 2 girls were actually true threats, whether they actually intended to menace them to the point of grave fear? Or will the court say, oh, well, these are just kids?
That's exactly right. And the defense here generally is, when I said homicide, I didn't mean I was going to actually kill the girl. And when I said the first tweet, I didn't mean that I was actually going to harm anyone. I was frustrated. I was upset. Maybe my words were a little bit too if you will, strong. But this does not rise to the level of, let's call it, imminent lawless action. Nothing was really, she was certainly not in fear of her life, although the words were used. So when you use the word homicide, when you use, the words, the whore word, whatever other words were used, it's serious, and the prosecutors will go after you for it.
Yeah, I want to bring in our community now, Richard. We have with us in our hangout, Fernita, Ilana, and Richie. Fernita, you're a law professor, and this, I brought up the First Amendment here, but when it comes down to it, this is something that strikes a deep chord because of its real big human element here. A girl was raped. A couple of kids were put on the stand, were put on trial. They've been put away, and now you have a couple others who were looking to intimidate the victim from really moving forward with her case.
And I think the judge, in determining whether or not this constitutes a true threat, will undeniably take the context into consideration. Because as Mr. Roth mentioned, the First Amendment rights are not absolute. And so I think it will be somewhat difficult for the girls to hide behind the First Amendment, given the seriousness of the situation.
Yeah, and Richie, we have a comment here from Sarah Primrose saying, I am glad that people are being held responsible for serious threats that are made via social media. This mode of communication can be used in a cruel and violent manner, and it's good to hear that this particular case of a cyber threat is considered this way. Do you think there should be a sliding scale for when these threats are made based on the context, whether it's to a rape victim or just to, a kid you've been picking on at school who's really done nothing to you or nothing wrong?
Oh, I think the important thing is to consider just beyond the context of this case in terms of just where people are communicating and spending their time online, time today. And that's really online. And people are talking online. There's an article in the New York Times last week from columnist Nick Bilton talking about he doesn't even answer his phone anymore. He doesn't answer voicemail. He talks to his mom over Twitter. And I think the important part of that is that since that's where we're communicating today, that even calling it a cyber threat is maybe overkill, that it really is a threat. Nonetheless, because where the people are is what we have to kind of hold accountable, and I think that's an entirely true point. And I think you have to consider the context beyond this as well as just the case too.
Ilana, what do you want to see coming from this particular part of the Steubenville case?
Yes, I mean, I think that especially with regards to any kind of rape or sexual assault case, just as a society, we've learned to ignore it, or we've learned to essentially say, well, they're kids who are partying with alcohol, and that's what kids will do. But it's absolutely not true. Everyone has a right to their body and to not have that piece of them violated. And I think that we as a society need to think about that and think about educating people as to, those basic rights, as opposed to like what's wrong with alcohol. I think it comes down to a basic principle of the fact that we consider someone a slut or a whore because they're in a compromising situation. And frankly, that doesn't help us move forward as a society. That just helps us to engage in the same poor behavior and cause a lot of lives to be damaged, especially the lives of the victims. So it's really a societal issue that we need to learn to think about this in a different way and not have people who think it's okay to tweet things about someone being a slut and a whore and destroying someone else's life because she was raped.
And if I may add, the bottom line here is that there was as she just said, a violent crime committed. And there's been a lot of sympathy for these boys, but there was no question here that there was a video of the rape, the pictures were taken of her nude body, and it just, what happened here is really despicable. And as much as there's a cry for the two boys who were, essentially convicted, they were convicted for good reason. So let's not forget about the poor victim who sat there and had to undergo all of this.